Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving straight into the human respiratory system. Now look, if you're a focused learner prepping for O-level biology, just staring at a diagram and memorizing labels isn't going to cut it. We really need to figure out the how and the why. So we're going to unpack the structure, the chemical engine, the physics, and the pathology of the lungs, and build you a rock-solid foundation of how this whole system actually works together.
Here's our game plan for today. We're hitting 5 key areas. First, the terminology trap. Second, the pathway of air. Third, alveoli, the exchange engine. Fourth, the mechanics of breathing. And finally, number 5, exercise and smoking. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The terminology trap.
Okay, so the absolute biggest trap students fall into with the respiratory system comes down to precise definitions. Breathing is literally just the physical movement of air in and out of the lungs. That's it. It's strictly a mechanical pump action. Honestly, it's incredibly helpful to completely isolate this physical concept of breathing from the complex chemistry that's happening deeper inside your body. Now compare that mechanical pump to gas exchange. Gas exchange is the actual physical swap of oxygen and carbon dioxide happening right at the alveoli. And then there's respiration, which is something else entirely. Respiration refers to the chemical reactions happening inside your cells, mainly in the mitochondria, that actually release energy from glucose. So these 3 terms, absolutely not the same thing. Breathing is the pump, gas exchange is the swap, and respiration is the chemical engine. Keep those 3 distinct, and I promise you, everything else is going to fall logically into place. Moving right along to Section 2, the pathway of air. Let's trace the journey. Air enters through your nose or mouth and travels down the trachea, which is kept propped open by these sturdy rings of cartilage. The trachea then splits into 2 bronchi, one for each lung. Once inside the lungs, those bronchi branch out into much smaller tubes called bronchioles. And finally, these bronchioles lead to tiny, microscopic clusters of air sacs called the alveoli. So it's a very precise anatomical sequence, right? Trachea to bronchi to bronchioles to alveoli. Examiners love testing that specific order, so lock it in. Now this brings up a really fascinating question. What are the specific functions of mucus and cilia in those airways? We know the trachea has this built-in defense system to protect our lungs from harmful particles, but how do they actually work together? Well, here is the exact examiner-approved distinction. Mucus traps the dust particles and microorganisms, while the cilia act like tiny little brooms moving that mucus up towards the throat. So it's actually biologically inaccurate to say that cilia trap dust. Don't make that mistake. The mucus is the sticky trap catching the debris, and the cilia are the tiny hair-like structures constantly sweeping that contaminated mucus up and away so you can swallow it safely. All right, Section 3, alveoli, the exchange engine. To really understand the alveoli, we have to talk about diffusion. Diffusion is the net movement of particles from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, moving down what we call a concentration gradient. Because the air sitting inside the alveoli has a higher oxygen concentration than the deoxygenated blood arriving there, oxygen simply diffuses across the wall into the blood. And conversely, carbon dioxide diffuses from the higher concentration in the blood right back into the alveoli so it can be exhaled. I want you to remember a really handy mnemonic here, LTBV. That stands for large surface area, thin walls, blood supply, and ventilation. Millions of alveoli bundled together create a massive surface area, which dramatically speeds up the rate of diffusion. The walls themselves are incredibly thin. We're talking just 1 cell thick, which creates a very short diffusion distance. But let's zoom in on those last 2 adaptations for a second to see how they drive the physics of it all. Why does a good blood supply actually matter so much? Well, as blood arrives at the alveoli with low oxygen, oxygen diffuses into that blood. Then, crucially, the blood rapidly carries that oxygen away. This constant removal prevents oxygen from just building up locally in the blood, meaning a steep concentration gradient is strictly maintained. Without that steep gradient, diffusion slows way down. Similarly, continuous ventilation constantly brings fresh oxygen into the alveoli. The blood removes it, the ventilation replaces it. It's a highly efficient, continuous loop. Which brings us to Section 4, the mechanics of breathing. Okay, pay close attention to the inverse relationship between volume and pressure here. It's pure physics. When you breathe in, inspiration, your diaphragm contracts and actually flattens out, while your ribs move upwards and outwards. This directly increases the volume of your thorax. And when volume goes up, pressure goes down. The pressure inside your lungs decreases, and air is literally sucked in from the outside. During expiration, breathing out, the whole process completely reverses. The diaphragm relaxes back into a dome shape, your ribs move down and in, thoracic volume decreases, pressure increases, and air is forced out. Just simple, beautiful physics.
So let's apply this mechanical understanding to a real-world scenario. Why exactly does your breathing rate increase during exercise? How does the physical stress of, say, running or lifting weights connect back to those respiratory mechanics we just talked about? Look, on an exam, simply saying the muscles need energy is way too vague. You're going to miss points. The specific logical chain of events goes like this. Exercise leads to an increased rate of respiration inside your muscle cells. This increased respiration creates a much higher demand for oxygen, and it results in a higher production of waste carbon dioxide. Your body detects this shift and responds by increasing ventilation, meaning both your breathing rate and depth, to uptake that oxygen and flush out that carbon dioxide more rapidly. It's fascinating how the macro, physical action links all the way down to a microscopic cellular demand.
Finally, Section 5, Exercise and Smoking. Let's look at what happens when this delicate engine is damaged by toxins. Cigarette smoke contains two massive culprits that cause very distinct harm: tar and carbon monoxide. Tar contains carcinogens, those are substances that increase your risk of cancer, and it physically damages those delicate cilia we talked about earlier. Without working cilia, mucus and bacteria just accumulate in the lungs, causing severe respiratory infections. Carbon monoxide, on the other hand, is a poisonous gas that attacks your transport system. It binds incredibly strongly to the hemoglobin in your red blood cells, literally stealing the space meant for oxygen. This severely reduces your blood's ability to transport oxygen to your tissues, forcing your heart to work significantly harder just to keep up. So you've got two very different toxins causing major damage through two very different biological mechanisms.
Which brings us to a vital question as we wrap up today. Are you just stating biological facts, or are you actually explaining the biological mechanisms? Look, anyone can memorize that alveoli have thin walls or that carbon monoxide is bad for you. But true mastery, that comes from understanding the why, like exactly how those thin walls create a dangerously short diffusion distance, or how carbon monoxide structurally binds to hemoglobin to starve your tissues of oxygen. Keep questioning the mechanisms behind the facts, and I guarantee you'll completely change how you understand biology. See you next time.